Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Trial Day 9. This will be a summary for Trial Day 9. So today we continue to have on the stand Cloe Albert, which is the way the trial ended yesterday with Cloe Albert on the stand. We're beginning to learn a little more about Cloe Albert's phone calls with Courtney Proctor. And as you can remember yesterday, she was stating that she very rarely talks to Courtney. Further evidence and questioning has concluded through also phone records that from February 1st to September 6th, Cloe Albert and Courtney Proctor actually talked 67 times, had 67 phone calls with each other. Now, Michael Proctor is the trooper or the lead investigator in the case, and Michael Proctor is Courtney's brother. These families have known each other since they were young. Defense talked to Cloe and asked her, what was the reasoning for all these conversations if you guys very rarely talk. Cloe herself said she didn't know, and that at this time she was no longer watching Courtney's children twice a week. So this further goes to show, okay, then what were you talking about? And no matter what asked about these conversations, she always just said she didn't know what the conversations were about. On February 10th, the police officer Michael Proctor interviewed Cloe Albert and her husband Christopher Albert. And you may be wondering, why did they interview him? Well, because Cloe actually was at the scene of the crime the morning of. So she said she was going to drop off a birthday gift for her nephew, which is also Brian Albert. Brian Albert is Cloe's nephew, and so she said she went over there in the morning to give Brian a birthday gift of Dunkin' Donuts, and she didn't plan on staying, but she was dropping off the gift to his car. And when she got there, Brian Albert saw her and called her inside. And through testimony or cross-examination, we also learned that Cloe and Christopher's son was actually at that house the night that this incident took place. So while the parents and all the parties involved were all at the bar of the waterfall, her son was actually over at Brian Albert's house, and Cloe claims that he had went over there to tell him happy birthday. Okay, so he was there the night of, so it would be the night of January 28th. You stay long enough, you're past midnight, and so you're now at January 29th. Her son was there during this time. Prosecution also asked Cloe if she was worried that Michael Proctor would be interviewing her son since he was at this house around that time, and she said no, she wasn't worried. Usually when you're interviewing witnesses, you separate witnesses so that way no one has time to collaborate stories or feed off of one another. They're each giving their account of what took place. However, in this case, or in this particular case, Michael Proctor, the friend of the family, the trooper Proctor, he interviewed Christopher and Cloe in their house together at the same time. And after this interview, Cloe Albert called Trooper Proctor's personal cell phone, and the call was 5 seconds, so I'm guessing maybe he didn't answer or something. But then Trooper Proctor called her back, and they talked for about 4 minutes. She was asked what the conversation was about. She said she doesn't remember. She also stated that she doesn't know when she got Trooper Proctor's phone number or personal cell phone number. She also stated that she didn't know when she received or got Trooper Proctor's phone number, and she agreed with defense that it could have been years prior since they've known each other for a long time, or since the families, the Alberts and the Proctors, are close friends. Cloe again stated that she's not best friends with Courtney Proctor, but that her sister is best friends with Courtney Proctor. You'll hear the name Brian Higgins, and Brian Higgins is friends with Brian Albert. Brian Albert is the individual whose house John was found dead at. And the two of them, both Brians, showed up to the waterfall or that bar that night together. And according to Julie, it wasn't out of the ordinary for those two to be together. So we are going to move on now. And right now, who they have on the stand is Nicole Albert. She is the one that's married to Brian Albert. They live in the home in which John's body was found dead at. Now, she states that Brian Albert, her husband, was out of town that night, which was a Friday night, and that he was in like New York for another officer's funeral. And so he was on his way back, and she messaged him to go to the bar that night. And so that's how he ended up at the bar. She also states that her husband and Brian Higgs did not show up to the bar together that night, and that in fact they showed up 30 minutes apart from each other. Now this contradicts Julie Albert's testimony, because she said that they both showed up together and that they were friends, and so it wasn't out of normal to see them showing up together. So who knows when they showed up at this point. She said once the band had wrapped up that they all decided to go to her house, and so there were a few people who showed up, and she said when she got home herself, her son was there, as well as her nephew Colin, which is Julie's son. She said that he just said he had stopped by to say happy birthday to his cousin, which is Nicole's son. And she said that he told her he was just waiting for his ride to pick him up, so he left not long after that. Now, defense pointed out that at no point in any of her interviews with the police or even during questioning did she ever state that Colin was at the house that night. And she said that the reason why she never stated that he was there was because she didn't consider him as part of the group that was there, because he wasn't part of the group that was at the waterfall bar that night. However, her son, Brian Jr., did have other people at the house that night. I think it was a couple girls and maybe another guy or something, I don't remember. But there were a couple people who were there. She also stated that neither Karen Reed or John O'Keefe were in her house that night, and she said that she was unaware of any type of plans that John and Karen had planned on going to her house that night as well. She said that once everybody was there at the house that they were also drinking at that point too. And she also stated that Brian Higgins did go to the house as well, and that she thinks he showed up around the same time she did when she got home, and she said that she thinks he parked in the front out by the curb. However, she said she thinks he parked up front in front of the curb, but he could have parked in the driveways, but she wasn't sure. But anyways, okay, and so she also stated that they left the bar around 12:10, and then it was through video footage shown to her that she actually had left around 12:20. So the people who showed up to her house were there. They were there, and she said that everybody left by 2:00 a.m., and the last person to leave was her daughter. And at that point, she said she went upstairs to her bedroom, and her husband was still awake. He was just laying in bed watching TV, and then she went to bed. And she said it was the next morning, later that morning, right, because it's already 2:00. So she said around 6:30, her sister Jennifer came bursting into her room, and that she was saying he's out in the snow. They found him out in the snow. She said she didn't know who the sister was talking about. She didn't know if she was referring to her own children or to Nicole's children. She said she didn't know who she was talking about. And so finally, I guess, Jennifer said, John, remember last night from the waterfall. Jennifer also told Nicole, you have to get up. The police want to talk to you guys. And so she said that Officer Link was officer to talk to her as well as some other officer, but she doesn't remember what officer it was. She said by the time that this officer talked to her, there were several people at the house by this time, and that was Jennifer, the one who had came through the door, her husband, and then Nicole's husband and herself. And Brian Higgins was there again. She said she thinks Brian Higgins came over around 7:30, and they called him over there so they could tell him about what happened, because he was friends with John and Karen. And so when Officer Link was talking to all these individuals, he was talking to them all in a group setting, and there wasn't any kind of separation of witnesses and individually questioning them. It was just like a group interview, basically. And as a result of that, also Julie Albert was also there, because if you remember through her testimony, she was saying that she had went by that morning to drop some Dunkin' Donuts off to her nephew for his birthday, and she was just leaving it in his car when Brian Albert called her into the house. So she was one of the ones that was there as well. We learned that they were interviewed as a group, and then after all of this, the Officer Link told them that the state police would be reaching out to them to interview them further in a couple days. However, or to interview them. And she said she heard from them in a couple days. However, defense pointed out that actually it was 6 days later when state police finally contacted them to interview him. She also stated that she didn't see any kind of fighting or tension between John and Karen that night at the bar. She also said that she didn't talk to him because she didn't know Karen. However, she didn't notice any kind of fighting or that Karen was intoxicated or anything of that sort. So through cross-examination from defense, she also stated that she had never talked to her sister Jennifer prior to Jennifer coming in through the door or bursting in through the door and, yelling about them finding him. However, defense showed evidence that she had in fact answered 2 calls from Jennifer that morning before the time in which Jennifer had burst through the door. Now, unfortunately, as this trial has continued to go, prosecution objected to this questioning, and the judge sustained the objection. And prosecution said they wanted to look at that, like the phone record before it was shown to the witness, who is Nicole. And once he looked at the evidence, he asked to approach the judge in the sidebar. So they went to the sidebar again, and after that, defense tried to ask the question again in various forms. However, as always, prosecution continued to object, and the judge sustained the objections. Defense also tried to ask Nicole, well, who was in the bedroom with you besides your husband and you? And she said nobody, just her and her husband and the dog. And so defense was saying, okay, well, you're aware that phone companies have information saying whether it's going to a voicemail, whether the phone's being answered by a voicemail or by an actual, answer. When that happened, prosecution objected, and Nicole maintained that she never answered the call. However, prosecution continued to object, and Judge Beverly, as always, continued to sustain the objections. And then she said, okay, we're going to take our lunch break. So that is where we're at. So once she sustained the objection, she put them all to lunch. So let's continue. So after lunch break, Nicole was back on the stand. She answered that she never received a voicemail that morning from her sister Jennifer. So she was also questioned during cross-examination about a dog that she had named Chloe. And this particular dog apparently bit somebody. She was asked about that dog's behavior, about it attacking or being aggressive, and that it bit another dog. And then defense also pointed out that it wasn't just the dog that the dog bit, some other dog that dog Chloe bit. It was also a human as well. And Nicole said that it was the human that was trying to break up the dogs from fighting. But apparently this dog of hers, Chloe, had escaped from the backyard, I believe she said, and went out and attacked that dog and that lady. And so since then, the dog has been rehomed after having this dog for X amount of years. And she said that she rehomed it to somebody in Vermont. She was cross-examined about where the dog is now and the fact that she never produced the whereabouts according to defense's request on where this dog Chloe is located. And of course, we have the prosecution objected, the judge sustained, and then struck the question, then said, well, questions aren't evidence, so we can leave the question on the record, but the objection is sustained. So defense then asked, you've never turned over evidence to the Commonwealth regarding the whereabouts of Chloe. So the Commonwealth is the prosecution. Defense asked, okay, then you've never turned over evidence to the Commonwealth regarding the whereabouts of Chloe. And Nicole said, yes, I believe I have. Defense sounded really surprised, and this attorney, because there's three of them, the lady said, when did you do that? Then prosecution objected, and the judge sustained it, and then they went into sidebar. And after they were in the sidebar discussing whatever they were discussing, that was the end of the questioning, and so they moved on to a new witness. You may be wondering why they're talking about this dog. Since I started this late, and I'm just trying to summarize each day of the trial here, I was informed that some of John's injuries were on his arms, and apparently they looked like dog bites. So, I mean, I'm just going to give you that much information at this point. I don't know anything else but that, but I was curious why we were talking about a dog. And so this is apparently where that plugs in too. So we will continue and we will learn together. So the next person on the stand is Brian Albert, which is Nicole Albert's husband. Remember, Brian Albert is the individual, as well as with Nicole, that owned the property in which John's body was found dead in. So Brian Albert has lived in that particular house for 11 years. And prior to that, his parents owned it, so he said he spent some of his childhood there. Kevin is Brian Albert's brother, and he is a detective in Canton. Brian Higgins and Brian Albert and Kevin all drove back from that police officer's funeral in New York together on this particular Friday, January 28th. They were first at the Hillside Bar, then Brian Albert left to the Waterfall Bar. Brian also said that Brian Higgins also showed up to the Waterfall Bar later on that night. He stayed at the Hillside Bar for a little longer and then went on over to the Waterfall. Brian Albert said that Nicole, Caitlin, Chris, Julie, Matt, Jennifer were all at the Waterfall together that night, and another couple, which he doesn't remember the name of that couple. And then he said that after about half an hour, Brian Higgins showed up to the Waterfall. And he said from then, after a half an hour after, John O'Keefe and Karen showed up to the Waterfall. He said that he considers John a friend, but that John was more friends with Jen and Matt. And he knew John because he used to work at Boston PD with John, but said that he never worked with him directly, but he knew who he was and he would consider him a friend and someone he could hang out with and be cordial to. Brian Albert is the first person I've come across so far in this trial who doesn't remember what John O'Keefe was wearing that night, but that he does remember that he was wearing a hat. And he has no memory of him wearing a winter jacket. And he said he talked with John a few times that night as well at the Waterfall. Brian said that Jennifer and Matt and Brian Higgs all went to their house after they left the Waterfall. He also made mention that they had the dog Chloe for 6 to 7 years before they rehomed her. And he said when he got home that night after the Waterfall, he said he let Chloe out back to use the restroom, and that she was out for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then she ran back inside and then spent some time in the kitchen with everybody, and then he took her up to the bedroom. Prosecution asked Brian about a train that runs semi-close to their backyard, I believe, and he said that he's used to hearing the train, and so he doesn't really hear it going by. Although it wasn't all stated that clearly, prosecution kind of led him along the lines of answering those questions. So it was more of like, a train goes behind your house, correct? And he says, yes. Prosecution says, and you're used to hearing this train, so you don't really wake up to the noise, do you? Brian says, no, I don't hear it. He said he's used to the sounds it makes. So then he described the progression of the events from that night, and that he showed Brian Higgins his pictures of when he used to be a Marine upstairs. And I'm pretty positive that Nicole, when she was cross-examined, she had said that Brian, her husband, showed Brian Higgins the pictures in the family room. So I don't want to go back through all the trial. So after Brian Higgins, his friend, left, he said he went up to his bedroom and got in bed and started watching TV and then went to sleep. He said he woke up when Jennifer McCabe burst into the bedroom in the morning, and he didn't know who she was talking about until she said John from the waterfall. He said that she also then said that the police are downstairs and they want to talk to you guys. He said he knew who Officer Link was prior to this whole thing, but that he never hung out with him before. And he also doesn't remember the other officer's name that showed up with Officer Link. So him and his wife both don't remember this second officer that was there with Detective Link. So I'm not quite sure what to think of that. It seems a little strange that neither of them remember the other officer, but like everybody is a police officer in this entire thing. No, not really everybody, but there's a lot of officers because they are officers. So I don't know, I just find that a little strange that neither of them remember the other officer that was with Officer Link. But we'll just take that as at face value and say they don't remember it. Mr. Albert said that the Officer Link talked to them for about 10 to 20 minutes. And then later on, Officer Link and Lieutenant Gallagher came by and talked with them for about half an hour. He also said that he was the one that called Brian Higgins to come back to the house. And he felt it was important for him to know what was going on and what had happened with John. Why he felt that, since I don't know why he felt that. He never states why he felt that. So I'm really hoping that during cross-examination with defense, we'll maybe ask him and get more information on why he felt it was important to call Brian Higgins back to his house in the morning. And what also seems strange about that statement too is because he had also stated that he didn't know of any kind of relationship with John and Brian Higgins. So I'm not quite sure why he would find it important to need to call Brian Higgins to let him know what was going on and what had happened. So hopefully defense will get a little more information. So that is actually the end of day 9. So we will continue with day 10 tomorrow.